Welcome, alumni and friends, to this session of the Duke Alumni Forever Learning Institute. It's an interdisciplinary program built around a series of themed conversations and learning experiences. I am DeAndre Earl, and I serve as the Director of Development for Duke Science and Technology. That's through our Alumni Engagement and Development Office. I'm honored to be working with my colleagues in lifelong learning here at Duke, and we are thrilled to have you with us for our Why Space, Why Duke. This is our first session of our Blue Devils in Space series. During today's conversation, two Duke faculty members and an alumnus will share their perspectives on the recent launch of the Duke Space Initiative, a bold interdisciplinary effort that spans cosmology, engineering, medicine, economics, policy, and commercialization. We'll reserve time for questions and answers at the end of the session, so please feel free to put your questions in the chat as they come to mind. And so to guide today's conversation, I'm joined by my colleague and good friend, Dan Skolnick. Dan is the associate professor. He's an associate professor in our physics department. He's also the director of the Duke Space Initiative. His research focuses on measuring the expansion history of the universe while uh, using world-class telescopes to address fundamental questions in cosmology, including composition and evolution of the universe. Professor Skolnick is widely recognized as a leader in the field and has received multiple fellowships for his work. He is also one of the most highly cited scientists in space science. And now I'll pass it on to Dan to begin the conversation with Eve and Jonah. Please please join me in welcoming them to our Forever Learning Institute.
All right, great. Thank you, DeAndre, for that introduction. I'm just going to share my screen. Okay. All right, can people see this okay?
Looks good to
Yep.
me.
All right, great. Thank you so much, everyone, for listening in. This is the first of 6 sessions. We're talking about all the really exciting things happening in space at Duke and also what's going on in the world right now. I'm really pleased to be joined by Professor Eve Aviakis, who you'll hear about in the middle of this presentation, who does work on understanding the Big Bang and the beginning of the universe, and an alum and engineer at Rocket Lab, Jonah Embry-Seckler. And you're going to hear at the end of this presentation his path from Duke to do really some cutting edge work on pushing us out into space. Okay, so I want to kind of give a sense first of where things are. You're probably seeing almost every day now in the news something that's about space, some new launch, some new company, and really what's happening is that we've really begun the second space race. So it took a solid 60 years or so to go from Space Race 1 to Space Race 2, but now you can feel it in full sprint. And what we believe here at Duke is that Duke can play a really important role in shaping the science, industry, and policy of our future in space. And Duke prides itself on being very interdisciplinary in nature, and I hope to kind of explain why that type of motivation is really important for everything that's happening in space today. So over the last few years, I think there's been a society-wide realization of the importance of space to nearly every facet of society. We had a journalist, Christian Davenport, come. He worked for the Washington Post. There's just a few of his most recent articles about GPS being attacked, the U.S. and Chinese satellites dogfight in orbit, the Golden Dome. You're also hearing about how it's these space companies like SpaceX, Blue Origin, Rocket Lab, that you hear about from Jonah, they're becoming the largest companies in the world. So the amount of attention, the amount of importance, both on the kind of society side, on the military side, and on the financial side, space has become a central player in society. And still, there's really a number of questions that need to be answered. So these are just a couple articles that are posted this week on two big issues. One is that we're launching so many satellites into the sky that the idea of nighttime, of darkness, is starting to go away. I mean, the darkness has been there since it's such a human element that we don't think about all the time. But now there's so many reflective satellites, and now satellites that actually get shine down sunshine, that this idea of darkness is starting to go away. Another issue is that just we're launching so much stuff that stuff can crash into other stuff. This is sometimes called the Kessler effect that cause a possible domino effect. And we have to be very careful now about making sure things don't collide, that we preserve space. So there's a number of not just engineering challenges, but also policy challenges as well, and very, I think, human challenges. What we decided is that there's really a number of professors at Duke who are working at space either on the science side or engineering or policy or economics. We want to merge and form something that could be greater than the sum of its parts. And we started what we're calling the Duke Space Initiative. So this is science and policy to advance cosmic exploration. So it's Duke's interdisciplinary initiative combining astrophysics, space policy, diplomacy, law, engineering, economics, history, medicine, and life sciences. It unites the hard science with policymaking to shape human exploration, the cosmos from deep sky cosmology to the geopolitics of Mars. So we're really trying to cover all facets, and each part of these are really important. Even space medicine is becoming an entire industry to itself right now. Okay, well, what we have at Duke are about over 40 professors working across 6 schools. That includes the School of Medicine, the School of Law, Trinity, Pratt, working on space in some way. What we're all paying really close attention to is that the space industry is just growing extremely fast. It's really one of the fastest growing industries in the world. The projection is it'll be a trillion plus by 2035, and then we're in this new space race now, as everyone calls it. And that means that there's a tremendous number of opportunities for space exploration, commercialization, and at the same time, these challenges and these consequences. And we really had the privilege of getting from Duke alums about over a $2 million gift to connect to all of the work that's happening across campus, connect to our great alumni community, people like Jonah, and pull things together so that we could address all these challenges in a more cohesive interdisciplinary front. Okay, well, we've only existed for about 7 months or so, and we really had 2 main focus areas. One is to build this community of Duke professors, staff, students, and alumni. And I hope that there are people on this call that are thinking, hey, I work on space in some way, or I'm interested to get involved. That would really be great because the space field its tentacles seem to be growing every day. And then second, we are a teaching university besides a research one, and we really just want to serve the growing enthusiasm of the undergraduate and graduate student body in terms of space exploration and related careers. Every day, there's an undergrad asking for a connection to an internship or trying to get involved in some new space policy conference, and we just want to try to be good stewards of that excitement. And space is really just this uniquely multidisciplinary thing, and we're trying to match that with our space initiative. We have one professor, Phil Stern, who is an expert historian in British colonialism and how they use ships to explore different parts of the world, and he's tying that to kind of what's now happening in this second space race of kind of pushing out and kind of what are the things that you have to be mindful of? What lessons can you learn from history? So it's those kinds of ties that we're making that are really interesting. I just want to give a couple shout outs to some of our alums who are doing just great things and have been really connected from the beginning. So our first speaker to kick off our space initiative is Anna Menon. People may have seen some news about her. So she was just selected to be in the 24th NASA astronaut class. Given some of the delays people might be seeing about the Artemis mission, so it's quite possible she may be the first woman on the moon or the first person on Mars. So you can see that's me and the co-director Michael Troxel, along with the Duke president Vince Price. You can see my name tag is not doing the best there, but it was really amazing to hear about her experience. And now she has stayed connected and she messages us about what's going on. And we're hoping one of these days she'll do a new Blue Devils in space, but she'll actually be in space. And we'll do that over Zoom, which will be really interesting. Just yesterday, we had Jordan Charles, who is a vice president of Blue Origin. one of the leading launch companies in the world. He's another Duke alum, a class of 2009. And he was talking about how exciting this was for him to see that, when he was there, the space program at Duke just was only just getting going. And now there's just a packed auditorium, packed room for him. And there's just a tremendous amount of excitement for all this work. But I mean, this is one of the top space companies and the top positions at a space company, and he's a Duke alum. And just one other one I want to call out because this will be important a little later on is Nicholas Downs. So he is the principal scientist at what's called the Nevada Test Site. This is the crater training ground for all NASA astronauts. And you could see here, these are pictures where people can go and put on the spacesuits. And we're in some discussions with him about possible things to do in the future. So we really have these just amazing alums that we have gotten in better contact with over these last 6 months, which have been really exciting. We also have really amazing professors. So my co-director of the Space Initiative, Michael Troxel, he actually just won last month what's called NASA's Exceptional Public Achievement Medal. This is a pretty rare honor, and it's for his work helping the Roman Space Telescope. That's the sweatshirt that I'm wearing right now. I also work on this. We have professors in law school like Jonathan Weiner, who's one of the leading experts in regulating risks in outer space. We have Professor Tim Hammond. His work was just called out in last White House report about space because he has figured out this new kind of algae that's helpful for fuel to Mars. And actually, our local Congresswoman, Valerie Foushee, she is the ranking member of the House Space Committee. And she was just here. You can see this is February 20th, just a few weeks ago. So just in the last few weeks, there's been all these things going on. Just shows you how exciting things are. So I'll pass this to Eve for a second to tell you a little bit about her work.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. I am so excited to talk about space at Duke and cosmology and astronomy specifically, since that's what I work on. So here you can see a story that was written about the lab I'm starting up at Duke. I'm in my second year here in the physics department, and I'm also on the steering board for the Space Initiative. And we are creating the first ever experimental cosmic microwave background laboratory at Duke. Which I can explain about in a minute. But first, I'll just say here you can see me wearing oxygen up at a little over 17,000 feet in elevation in the Chilean Atacama. And I'm actually standing on one of our telescopes. And in the background, you can see a mountain on which we're building another one. So this is where our work takes us, building novel instruments at some of the highest locations you can access from the ground to peer back into the very beginning of time. So if you go to the next slide, Dan. So this is that lab that I mentioned we're building. We just installed the first Blue Force brand dilution refrigerator at Duke. This creates one of the coldest parts in the entire universe. It's colder than interstellar space when we turn the thing on. And it's also the same type of instrument that is being used to create quantum computers. And that's another exciting thrust for the physics department here lately. But you can see here now, Duke students are able to get trained on this cutting edge cryogenic instrumentation work. And even down to the high school level, you can see in the center bottom there, a student from the North Carolina School of Science and Math is getting hands-on training. He's now studying engineering at Georgia Tech, and the student we're working with right now just signed on to become a Duke undergrad too. So we're starting from the high school level and going all the way to postdoc and above, training students and shipping them off to these extreme observing sites. So on the left-hand side, you can see that telescope I mentioned we were constructing high up on the mountain, that CCAT observatory. That's above 18,000 feet in elevation. It's the highest and most capable submillimeter telescope ever constructed. And then below that, you can see that white building. That's where I was standing in the previous photo. This is the Simons Observatory. And I'm so excited that Duke is now a member institution of both of these observatories and is actually the only other United States partner institution for the CCAT observatory, meaning we'll have access to this novel data set as soon as it's available for students and faculty to work on, and we'll get to steer the scientific direction of that observatory as well. If you go to the next slide, I'm also active in science communication, part of why I'm excited to talk to you all today. I enjoy bringing astronomy and physics to people of all ages. I have a series of children's books out covering particle physics and astronomy. And we are actively creating lab tours, public talks, and sky gazing events that you can see here. Actually, we're stargazing. We're looking at the sun in the middle of the day, but we also do some nighttime observing, bringing these exciting new physics events to people in the Triangle. And that's only going to get better through the Space Initiative. So happy to be here, and thanks so much.
Great. And I can say, as a father of two young kids, these books are excellent, and they've all been vouched for by my two daughters.
A high bar.
Okay. So I just want to continue with this, what else is happening on campus before handing it to Jonah. So another really exciting thing is starting to spin off companies from work done from research on campus. So this is a picture here of Michael Boyarsky, who's a grad student here. He works with another professor on our steering board, David Smith, and they just spun off a company called Extelis. They got $6.8 million of seed funding. This is to create a new kind of antenna, essentially using advances in metamaterials. So you could capture 10,000 images per day, about 100 times more than what people could do before. So as the boundaries of research are really pushed, there's a big effort at Duke to translate that into commercial entities. The other piece that's just one of the most exciting things here is the the amount of student excitement. And there's just a now multiple space clubs. There's Duke Students for the Exploration and Development of Space. That's called SEDS. There's the Duke Aero team, who have now gotten quite competitive. The Duke Aviators Club, the Society of Physics students, the Space Law Society of Duke, tries to figure out what should the laws that govern space be, and the Stargazing Devils Astronomy Club. And if anyone is visiting Duke or visiting Durham, nearly every Friday night there is of good weather, there is a chance to do observing. It's just really an exciting time. And this is also propagating through into the coursework. So there's through two things. One's called the BAS program, where you could propose for new types of courses. And another thing that just started this year is what's called the Constellation course. So I'm part of a course called What is the Cosmos, where there's a science course and a English course and a history course, and they're all kind of touch the same theme. So Cosmos is one of them. But we're oversubscribed for the amount of students that want to partake in this. We host regular events. You could see one about from Diana West, who works at NASA, talking about beyond exploration, but allows students to be in a cohort together in their freshman year and take classes of a subject that they're passionate about, but not just a science class, but in this interdisciplinary mold where they could hear about how space or how thinking about the universe propagates into literature or propagates into history or other subjects. So what's our long-term vision? Well, what we're really trying to do is become a strong influence in the space arena across the different fields. We believe strongly in the Duke values of respect, trust, inclusion, discovery, and excellence. And right now in space, this is kind of, some people call it the Wild West, where you could launch lots of things and uh, things are moving very, very fast. And we need to have these discussions about losing the night sky or things crashing, or what are the proper guardrails on these types of things. So what we want to do is build this sustained institute focusing on multidisciplinary investigation problems related to space, and really trying to become this hub in the Triangle in North Carolina to connect more to the biomedical scene as space medicine for astronauts gets more and more important, and leverage this legacy of flight in North Carolina. So before we get into discussion, I want to hand it over to Jonah, one of the alums we're most proud of. And Jonah will tell you a little bit about his journey from Duke.
Cool. Sorry for the mute. Thank you for the wonderful introduction, Dan. Yeah, as you mentioned, my name is Jonah Embry, class of 2021, mechanical engineering, material science. I actually did do research with Dr. Tony Huang's lab, but I was probably best known at Duke for being a Duke Quidditch player. I guess a disclaimer before we get too far along. All of the ideas that I express here are exclusively my own. They don't necessarily reflect Rocket Lab's views and perspectives. Even still, I'm going to be trying to keep any answers pretty high level, and then hopefully Morgan will yell at me after this. So fingers crossed in that regard. The last thing I want to highlight on this slide is the photo to the top right. It's actually a picture of Matt Pleatman, who is one of our other fantastic Duke alumni. He came to Duke in 2020 on a recruiting trip from SpaceX. And this photo is one of my favorite photos. As it turns out, it's a photo of me, myself, Matt, also both my current roommates here in Southern California. Roommate number one is Caleb. He's a manager at SpaceX now. Roommate number two, Justin. He's working in a space adjacent startup here in Southern California. And then two people over is another future SpaceX person. So as it turns out, a lot of aerospace in that photo. And it's always fun to look back on that. Next slide, if you're good. So how did I get to where I'm at? The first company I went to after graduating from Duke was SpinLaunch. For those who are a little less familiar, that's a company that was and still is attempting to build the first space catapult, which sounds like a crazy idea. Very much was it was a great place to start. And so I worked as an INT engineer on the L-33 launcher system. That's the picture at the top right. 33 stands for 33 meters in diameter. That entire thing is about 150 feet tall. So for reference, it's roughly the size of the copper section of the Statue of Liberty. So my first 9 months, I lived out in Truth or Consequences, New Mexico. Technically, I lived next to it in a shipping container on the launch site, and we put the thing together. Once the system became operational, I turned into a launch operations engineer. So I was on console for the first 10 launches. If you go and look up some of the YouTube videos, you can see me in the background, the screenshot on the bottom right of that. After about 9 months, I kind of switched my role into a bit of a hybrid role between the launch systems team and our satellite team, and then transitioned fully to the satellite team around month probably 11, where I started designing satellite subsystems, specifically the battery pack, the harnessing for the spacecraft we're designing, launch separation system, kind of a lot of different roles. That's kind of the nature of the startup. And then the bottom left-hand photo is really a photo of the first spacecraft I ever built. So it was a 12-view CubeSat technology demonstrator for SpinLaunch. And then, that kind of led into my current career at Rocket Lab. If you want to go to the next slide, Dan. Where I've been ever since. So I've built 14 spacecraft across 7 different programs while here. Actually should be starting number 15 later today. So fingers crossed everything goes well. Probably the highlight of those 14 spacecraft is going to be the 2 interplanetary spacecraft for NASA's ESCAPADE mission. Those 2 spacecraft are on their way to Mars right now. I think Berkeley just had an update about some of the science that they're doing. Would definitely encourage anybody who's interested to go look up the ESCAPADE mission. Really interesting mission. And then I also worked on the first 2 in-space manufacturing satellites for Varda. I worked on the first 9 telecommunication satellites for the Globalstar constellation. At Rocket Lab, I ended up wearing a lot of hats. I support 3 different programs mainly. So I do operations for the Globalstar constellation. I'm a manufacturing engineer for one of our US government constellations. I'm the AI&T lead for a different US government constellation. I'm a thermal vacuum subject matter expert. I'm also our contamination controls expert. And then I also work with our business development team on new proposals. The contracts that I've worked on have resulted in more than $800 million in new contracts awarded. So pretty excited in that regard too. That's pretty much all I got.
Great.
Thanks, Dan.
Thank you so much. And right after this slide, we're going to ask Joe some questions about kind of how people can follow in his footsteps and ask Eve also about how things are changing. Before we do, I just want to give one plug for a really exciting thing that I think will lead to even more in the future, which is what we're calling the Forever Learning Weekend Duke Space Academy. So this will be in the fall of 2026. So if you're excited about this and you want to see, get your hands on instruments, see our hyperbaric chamber on campus, get to kind of have a lot of one-on-one time with our robotics team, then we're hoping some of you will come to campus and do this. So this will be what we're calling the Duke Space Academy. So it'll be a 3-day experience on Duke's campus for lifelong learners who want more than insight, who want experience. So you get access to all this really interesting research that's happening on campus, from the School of Medicine to engineering to Trinity. Talk to the law professors, have all these conversations and get to be part of these really immersive simulations. So this is designed not to be a lecture series, designed just to kind of get in the same room as a bunch of us and see what we're working on and ask whatever you see on the wall. And we think it could be really fun. And we're hoping that this is going to be one of multiple where there's kind of more experiential activities for alums. And we're really excited about that. Okay, so I'm going to stop sharing, and our plan is that I'm going to ask Jonah and Eve some questions that I thought would be interesting to hear what they thought, and then we're going to open the floor to what you all think. And I'm going to stop share. Okay. So the first question is for Eve. Hey, Eve. Um, what scientific question excites you most? And can you tell us about what's changing across the funding landscape in terms of federal, private, commercial funding? How's that looking now?
Yeah, so I think we've all probably, if people are interested enough to join today's conversation, seen some of the incredible images that have come out from telescopes like the Rubin Observatory, which you're a part of, Dan, here at Duke. And when you look at these images, you're seeing just such an incredible diversity of galaxies and clusters and stars and nebula. But yet we only understand what maybe 5% of that stuff is. We live in a universe dominated by dark matter and dark energy, and we do not know what these things are and are seeking to understand that. So for me, I think the most compelling scientific question is just what is all of this stuff and how did it get here? So I also work on how galaxies evolved in time and how the largest scale structure in a universe formed. And if we're going to go launch rockets and become pioneers of this new landscape, we need to understand what it is we're working with out there. So I'm very excited about that. And to speak to funding, yeah, this has been a rapidly changing and challenging landscape to navigate, especially in recent years, as new faculty, poses new challenges as I try to get a group off the ground. And I think the exciting thing that I'm grateful about is that private industry and individuals have been contributing more to the type of innovation they want to see. So, for example, for CCAT Observatory, which I showed the photo of a few slides ago, we have a generous donor, Fred Young, who has enabled the Fred Young submillimeter telescope. And it's not just one individual making something happen, but because of those contributions, Cornell stepped in at a very high level and matched these contributions to enable this effort. And somewhat similarly, the Simons Observatory was kicked off by Jim Simons and the Simons Foundation, giving a generous gift that was then recognized in terms of the advancement it provided our field by federal agencies. And now we're entering a new era for that observatory that's enabled by the National Science Foundation, Advanced Simons Observatory. So with the current landscape challenges, for example, I was involved in the next generation cosmic microwave background experiment called CMB Stage 4. That was canceled last year. This was an effort that united the field, and it's a shame to see that effort go. But that happened in part because the NSF is shutting down any new construction in the pole observing area in the South Pole for at least 10 years. So it's moves like that from federal agencies that are basically requiring us to think outside of the box and rely on individuals who are excited about exploring the universe, like the generous donors for the Space Initiative.
Great. Awesome. Thank you, Eve. So, Jonah, when I look at some of your pictures at Rack Lab, I see the huge number of people and expensive instruments. So, how do you see Duke kind of remaining relevant? What its role should be in this era when now kind of commercial space has become such a huge thing?
So I think that the first step is by by engaging people and really opening dialogue, like what we're doing right here. I think especially once and anybody who's online that has been part of the Southern California aerospace industry, we very much exist in a bubble. My entire social groups are made up of aerospace engineers, and so as a result, there's kind of like a common language we all speak. That when I go home to like Colorado and talk to my parents, they have no idea what I'm talking about, right? And so I think the first step is really by engaging with people in the industry and kind of breaking down some of that bubble and kind of getting some better insight into like what's actually going on. I think what's really exciting about where we're at right now with the space industry is we're starting to see what I kind of like to call the space application layer. The comparison I like to draw is to the internet, where the internet started out as this really cool project, but you had to be really into computers and technology and building your own circuit boards, and that wasn't for everybody. But as the internet started to have applications for other people, for like kind of everyday folk, all of a sudden everybody engages with the internet. This is how I'm talking to you right now, right? And so I think you're starting to see something similar with space. Space started out being kind of the realm of science where like NASA owned everything. Maybe you have a couple like US government or like, spy satellites, but predominantly you have science missions, telescopes, weather observation. I think we're transitioning away from just that now in terms of that being the value add into stuff where like this is now impacting people, like everybody's lives on a day-to-day basis. One really unfortunate but good example of this would be last month. There was a skiing tragedy in Tahoe where some skiers got buried by an avalanche. And this really highlighted the first use that I'd seen in the news of Apple's emergency SOS via satellite functionality, right? That is technology that is based in space that is being used to impact everyday people. Starlink is probably the easiest example to also point to. I'm sure most people have seen like the Super Bowl commercials. I think Starlink is very quickly going to become a household name with kind of the work that SpaceX is doing right now. And so we're starting to see in the commercial sector all of these like new ideas emerge, right? With like in-space manufacturing, asteroid mining. Everybody is talking about AI in space these days. Last year, the direct-to-device was like all the rage. But the companies are still kind of feeling out this design space and figure out like, okay, what actually works for commercial interests? And then to tie this back to the question about how does Duke as a research institute remain relevant? The problem that private companies still run into is they have to be commercially viable. Because of the success of companies like SpaceX, like Rocket Lab, Blue Origin, AST, there's a lot of pressure to show results and show results early to investors. People forget that SpaceX has been around for 25 years, right? And so as a result, you don't have necessarily the timeline to explore some riskier ideas. I think this is where universities can really carve out their niche. Historically, NASA has really helped with this, right? This is where government funding would come in. But there's a lot of inconsistency with NASA these days, right? You have changing priorities between administrations. You have kind of a push to be more like business focused. And so I think this is one area where private universities can really step in and make an impact, where you're researching ideas that don't necessarily have immediately commercially available, like that aren't immediately commercially viable. The NASA Escapade mission is a great example of this, for instance. That is a UC Berkeley payload. UC Berkeley is now operating that spacecraft. They came to us because they didn't know, how to build a spacecraft. And so we put the spacecraft together, we integrated their payload, but we didn't do any of the science of their payload. We got it to orbit, we did the commissioning process for them, but they now run that spacecraft, right? They're doing the science for it. And I think this is where research institutions can really have an impact in the space sector, is by exploring these ideas that are not maybe immediately commercially viable. And then as we make discoveries, then the commercial sector can step in if this is something that's worth doing from like the commercial standpoint. But there's a ton of work to be done, and I think that work is not going to be done unless research institutions kind of take up that mantle.
Great. Yeah, actually, I didn't even think this until you said it. Of like, I said there's a barrier of you have to come through NASA to start a big space mission. But if you're saying we could reach out to Rocket Lab or other companies and do this, that really kind of lowers the barrier of entry, which to me personally is really exciting.
And I think part of this is where like you see as more launch vehicles come online, the cost of launch is going to decrease significantly to the point that I don't think you will need to go through NASA. I mean, a good example of this is the Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter, I think was something like a multi-billion-dollar project. No, I think it was like 700 million. I think for launch alone, that was $90 million. The entire Escapade mission for 2 spacecraft was like $94 million, with a good chunk of that going to the launch vehicle. As more launch vehicles come online, the cost of launching will become more competitive, which means prices will go down. If you look at some of the early preliminary numbers on things like a Starship right transfer, I think it will get to the point that private institutions might be able to fund their own missions. And I think that's one of the really exciting avenues.
Yeah. Really interesting. So, one the nice thing about having Jonah and Eve is they're both instrumentalists, whereas I should not be near a hammer. So Eve, kind of on that front, you can measure the signatures of the Big Bang. First, how is that even possible? But second, how does working on those instruments, the training of that, kind of help with not just science but other paths?
Yeah, I was excited to hear, Jonah, about your vacuum expertise because we use high vacuums to make our cameras. So yeah, it's quite a task making an instrument that studies the oldest light visible in the universe. But on the other hand, it's actually something that our old style TVs were doing from a long time ago when we had antennas. A percentage level amount of the static in TV static is actually the cosmic microwave background itself. So it's this incredible, pervasive, highly uniform background that is everywhere. But we are now doing way better than old TV static. We use these custom detectors that are very unlike any of the detectors that are in our cell phones or anything like that. They rely on the principle of superconductivity. So these special types of metals that lose all resistance when they get really, really cold. And we build these giant vacuum cameras, populate them filled with these detectors, do a lot of interesting optics development to ensure we're focusing only on the light that we're interested in observing. And then we bring them up to very high elevation to put them on our telescopes. And why are we on the ground? It's hard to launch these large mirrors. The larger the mirror, the better your resolution. We want high resolution images of the cosmic microwave background. So we have large observatories that are on the ground, but high up enough that we get some of about half of Earth's troposphere. We get above what we would otherwise be absorbing the light that we want to see. So it's a little bit like going to space, but space you can drive a truck to. And so as I'm actually very interested in this, as launch technologies improve, it's already opening potential future avenues for us to do new space missions. So I was recently on a call that now that rockets have, the private industry has exploded in such a way that we might be able to have bigger payloads, more accessible and more easy for us to access. It's allowing future directions that were otherwise impossible. But what we do is we build labs, largely at academic institutions, but highly partnered with national labs. And we develop these detectors, we develop new cameras, build them out. Students get hands-on training at every step of this. A graduate student I work with just flew out, for example, to NIST, the National Institute of Standards and Technology in Boulder, Colorado, to go pick up some detectors and hand carry them to make sure they're not damaged on an airplane to Cornell. And then Tilak, a graduate student working with me in the physics department here at Duke, just flew out there and is now helping him integrate that into the camera at Cornell. And later this year, we're going to actually, Tilak just won a graduate school fellowship to go and deploy these things this summer, travel award, to actually get the experience of being up there at extreme high elevation and put this together. So sorry, I got excited about the instrumentation. What's the second half of your question
Oh,
there?
just how does that training help?
Oh,
Uh,
yes. Yeah, so for example, Tilak is not necessarily interested in becoming a professor. And I'd say, the majority of students these days know that it's a competitive environment out there for jobs. They're not going to necessarily climb the academic ladder. There are only so many positions available. And so I'm excited to work with them specifically to guide their skill development for industry. A number of our recent graduates are doing awesome work at a variety of companies. IBM is one that uses our exact brand of dilution refrigerator to make their quantum computers. So we have people who are very well poised to just step in and immediately become cryogenic experts at a variety of quantum computing and other startup type firms. Another recent graduate who was well versed in the development of our cryogenic cameras is now working for Google. And a variety of people are doing other types of, like I mentioned, the optics development. There's somebody doing optics coatings for 3M. And aside from just the hardware development, the analysis skill sets that students develop working on our science data are directly transferable to data science, to even the financial industry, working on algorithms and programming. So it sets students up very well to succeed in a variety of platforms. And I'm excited to see them go off and do that, starting with the student that I'm talking about right now, who's cutting his teeth and in the future is interested in pivoting to industry.
Great. Joan, I'll give this last one to you because I know you have some strong opinions on this. So if Duke were to design the ideal space pipeline today, what would it look like? How do you think these next 10 years are going? And I know you're so future looking. How should the Duke Space Initiative orient itself? How should Duke orient itself to an industry that's changing so quickly?
So I think I'll start by answering the 10-year question first. One, I don't like nobody knows what's going to happen in 10 years, especially in this industry. So much changes so quickly that like 2 years ago, I could not have pictured where we're at right now. But when I talk to people about this, the, the comparison that I really like to make is to the expansion of the United States to the West, where what people and like really the laying of like railroad tracks, because what you're doing is you are increasing the ability to actually go and expand into a new space, right? Rockets are the railroad track. And so and I think a lot of people right now, when thinking about space, they're focused on the rockets, right? Where rockets are pretty easy to generally understand. You know, they're large, they're big, they're loud, the flaming side goes down, right? But they don't necessarily, and while like the railroads were hugely valuable, right? I think you have the robber baron, I think it was like Jay Gould, like made all of his fortune on it. What people really did once they could go west, that is kind of the story of the expansion of the United States. And so what you're seeing right now, I think, is kind of the laying of the railroad tracks. And so what Duke should do, I think, is start asking the questions and preparing the students for what do you do once you can get there, right? And so I think the ideal Duke pipeline kind of prepares students for this kind of world or frontier that's going to be unlocked. In a perfect world, Duke creates a like satellite lab like FSL at the University of Toronto. Students spend 4 years working on satellites, enter industry with a ton of experience. That's probably not the most realistic option. I think in the actual world, it's like in the world we live in, it's two things. I think one part is getting students excited about space. I think because of general exposure to the news, that's probably the easiest thing. But like when I'm as a hiring manager, when I'm interviewing students, the thing I care about the most, especially for entry level positions, is are you excited about kind of what you're doing in engineering in general, and are you willing to learn? And the more that Duke can kind of foster that, the more competitive students will be, especially during the interview process. Once they get in the room, then the question is, how do you get in the room in the first place? And that's where Duke students right now, unfortunately, are kind of struggling. And that's all about giving the students applicable hands-on experience. And that's probably the most common answer, I'm sure, that everybody always hears. But I think there are two areas that Duke can really like focus on to improve this. The first is in hardware. I think the trap that I see right now, a lot of other institutions making, is they want to go and build a CubeSat or build a CubeSat program. So they go buy an off-the-shelf like flight computer for $60,000, the solar arrays, a battery with like a BMS system incorporated, right? You put together like a $500,000 satellite. Maybe you convince NASA to launch it. And while congratulations, you built one satellite and that's good, as a result, you kind of end up reducing access to that hardware. So students don't have the ability to, try to troubleshoot or try different things on the flight computer because the mistake of breaking it is $60,000, and that's not something an institution can really afford. A satellite, at the end of the day, as much as people in the industry like to pretend like it's this fancy thing, it's really a radio, a battery, and a flight computer, and you put in a box so it doesn't fall apart on the way to orbit, right? You can build a satellite analog for about $250. That to me is far more useful to students if they have the ability to put that together themselves, if they've gone through the troubleshooting, because I don't care that you've necessarily touched the $60,000 flight computer. I care that you know how to debug what happens when the flight computer is not talking to your radio. Or if I discharge my battery too much, how do I recover this? Or if my radio is transmitting on the wrong frequency, how do I diagnose this? And you can really get all of those lessons learned without, having the large expenditure that I think a lot of other institutions are putting into CubeSat programs, and you can have a bigger impact across more students. That's really today, the gap that I see. In terms of the next 10-year gap, I think it's going to be a mission operations experience. Right now, one of the best ways to gain an intuitive understanding of how things work in space is a video game called Kerbal Space Program, which I don't know if people are familiar with or not, right? I think it came out in 2011. It has these little cartoon characters. And so it's very cute and funny to play with, but the physics engine is actually pretty good. And as somebody that did not play Kerbal Space Program and now works in the satellite industry, you can tell who played KSP and who didn't. Because the thing is, the way things work in space is very different in terms of an intuitive or the framework than how things work on Earth. I have a very good intuition for how things work on Earth, but in space, I'm not nearly as good as some of my peers. Now, that isn't to say that Duke should go and like start a KSB class. What I think Duke can do, if Duke is very invested and serious about this, is Duke should invest in a test bed that can simulate the spacecraft, the space environment. In the commercial industry, we call this a hardware in the loop test bed. What you do is you end up simulating the inputs and outputs of the space environment into your hardware, and then functionally your spacecraft or your hardware doesn't know that it's not in space. While this does have some immediate upfront cost, once it's established, the cost of doing mission operations is the cost of electricity, which means once this is built, if you want to give a group of students the opportunity to simulate a mission to Mars, it's the cost of electricity. And I think that is something that no institution that I know of is currently doing. And I think that is going to be the biggest gap in the industry that we're going to see, especially in the next 10 years, as we have more things on orbit that need management, that need somebody to understand how they work. That is the gap that I see. And I think that's what Duke should pursue.
That's awesome. And I think you could see like we have such a great resource with our alums in the industry. And if we can be open and do what they say, I think there's uh, a lot of excitement that can happen on campus and for our students afterwards. So with that, I'd like to open it up to anyone listening. I see that there's a lot of questions in the chat already.
Sure. Dan,
Geoffrey,
if you don't mind, I'll help you out with that. I'll
yes, please.
throw you all a few questions that I'm seeing here and just throw it out to the group. So I'll start with this one. Who are we racing against and who are we racing with?
Yeah, maybe I could take that, and then I'm curious how Jonah feels. So I think there's kind of multiple runners in this race. One are other countries. So China is coming, but now every country is realizing that they need to have their own space industry for defense purposes, for telecommunications purposes necessary. And then I think there's another level of race of just this commercial race, which was not the case 60 years ago, where people are realizing that there is real money to be made, and a lot of utility in space. So probably what we hear most about is the commercial one, but the country one will just be getting bigger. Jonah, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, and so I think it depends on what lens you're viewing it from. You certainly have the two races that I think Dan has uh, kind of illuminated pretty well, but I think you also have the race from the policy perspective in racing the technology itself. One of the parts about space that's really interesting is that space connects us physically in a way that I don't think most people quite understand. So, like, we've been on the phone. A LEO, like one single satellite, will pass around Earth in 90 minutes, which means we're already halfway around Earth. That is physical hardware. As a result, space really unites humans in a way physically that I don't think we really intuitively understand, especially from like a policy perspective. And so the decisions that one country makes will impact all of us. And so I think as we have this pretty fragmented, global policy and thing, like figuring out how to actually make decisions that impact not just us, but everybody correctly is the other race that I think should be identified here in this case.
Um, what interactions are planned with other international space agencies and international bodies that attempt to regulate space?
Uh, I could start with this one. So just 4 months ago, I was at the UN. There's something called UNUSA, and the UN's doing a really good job trying to convene various countries and people working on space programs. But kind of like Jonah was just referring to, right now most countries can launch whatever they want, and the United Nations and other bodies are trying to get their hands around it, but I think I saw in the comments about climate change, it's very hard to get this multilateral agreement, especially as some countries are saying we're just getting going. So the, there's a lot of discussions, a lot of professors on campus like Giovanni Zanata are some of the experts in this, but it is quite a challenge on the policy side. Eve, do you want to add anything to that?
No, I think, I would default to who you just said in the Space Initiative, who's an expert in the field. It's not really
Yeah.
my field, but I'm excited to know that people
Yeah.
are actively thinking about it. It's an urgent
And
need.
in session 6, I think that this will be the focus on that question will be the focus for section 6 or section 5 or
Okay.
section 6.
Right. Um, where does Duke see space, pun intended, for this initiative? As universities in Florida, like Florida, Embry-Riddle, et cetera, have a head start in the space.
Yeah. Jonah, do you want to take a first crack and I'll take a second?
I think I think part of it is everybody's still trying to figure out what are the new rules and what is the best way to pursue this. Like I generally like the most competitive candidates that I see come from more Cal Poly, Michigan, certainly Purdue on the rocketry side. Actually, I haven't seen a ton out of Florida, but that could just be the exposure of candidates that I'm seeing. And so I think while some institutions might have already, have a head start in some ways, the rules are changing very quickly. And especially as launch, I think, becomes less of the focus in space application, I think you're going to see a bit of a reset.
Yeah, and I'll add, I think one thing that gives me a little bit comfort in terms of that competition is unlike Silicon Valley, which it feels very concentrated at Stanford and the Bay Area schools have just a natural advantage. Space is much more distributed, where California has this great scene, Texas, Florida, near DC. So I think that's better for competition, better for Duke. And if we could kind of leverage some of our great alumni and the resources that we have, I think we really have a good opportunity.
Can I ask?
Yeah, please, Eve.
Did you freeze?
I think she just froze.
If you can hear us, it appears you're frozen. We'll let you chime in once you're
Yeah,
functional again. I'll ask the next question.
great.
Does the space program have protections from the U.S. Space Force, or might it be co-opted by the Space Force?
Jonah, why don't you take that first? You probably have
Space,
more.
which space program?
That's a great question. I don't think that's noted.
Uh,
Yeah,
Maybe, yeah, I'm more than happy to follow up on any of these questions afterwards, but
Mhm.
probably need a little more context before commenting on that one too much.
Okay.
yeah. I mean, there's certainly a lot of partnerships with the U.S. Space Force, and the U.S. Space Force seems to be trying to figure out exactly what its role is. But there's still, I mean, the Space Force is still so new. Um, so. But I mean, that's even discussions we're having from North Carolina is connections with the Space Force. But I see them as kind of more of a funding and rooting for a lot of these companies like Jonah's, um, for like co-opting, I think.
All right.
Okay.
What are your views on the most recent commercial space executive orders?
Jonah, go ahead. I'll give.
I need to, I probably need to pump this question to my PR team. I think in terms of, yeah, I'm going to punt this one to
Yeah.
my PR team.
I can take I think one thing that has happened i- is the current administration certainly has less regulations than the previous one. Um, and for industry growing so fast, my sense is a lot of people in industry might think that's a good thing. Um, at the same time, I think like what I talked about earlier, like there's real worry about space debris, for instance. Or like what I feel most passionate about is ground-based observing with all these satellites up in the sky is gonna be very hard. So uh, it does feel like the Wild West, and as a fan of space, I'm net for that, but I also hope everyone can start putting up these guardrails before we lose a chance to. Um, and this is going to be tough. I mean, this is I think why we need this really interdisciplinary thing.
I think we got a clarification on the Space Force question. This is U.S. military, U.S. Space Force.
Would you remind me the context of the first part of it? Sorry, or remind me the initial question. I'm trying to
Yeah,
scroll through.
yeah. The question was, does the space program have protections from the U.S. Space Force, or might it be co-opted?
I assume that this program is not going to be immediately co-opted by a U.S. government agency, if only because I don't know if I see the value add, but Dan might be able to provide more illumination there.
Yeah, I see it more as a partnership right now. Um, DeAndre, I see a bunch of questions. Can I do a just rapid fire on the questions if
Sure,
that's okay?
sure,
Okay.
sure.
So have Duke teams had success combining telescope observations and AI to accelerate analysis of data? Absolutely. Our groups, like even my groups, we use AI in a lot of ways, not just for coding, which has been a huge accelerant, but uh, in using it to get rid of contamination, different issues. So yes, we are all about that. Oh, I see Eve has done an answer. Um, is Duke offering classes in the public policy and ethics area? So yes, we have a space policy class led by Giovanni Zonato. So you'll hear from him in session 6, but this is a big topic on campus, and we have multiple professors working on that. Um, is the School of the Environment part of the Space Consortium? Yes. And actually, one thing that we have a number of professors working on is what's called solar radiation management. So there's now a not crazy idea that people want to fly big kind of mirrors, but reflect light back to the sun. So take out a part of sunlight to stop climate change. And 3 years ago, people laughed at this idea, and now I actively hear about people working on it. So if we're not gonna, I don't know, stop eating hamburgers, this might not be a bad idea. Um,
What's
okay.
funny is there's also the opposite of that, where there's some companies that are going to add
Right.
mirrors to provide sunlight to some areas of Earth and darkness.
Yes.
You
Yeah.
really have
Reflect.
both
Yeah.
sides of it.
Right. You gotta get yeah both sides. Actually, one thing we want to do next year is have a host a conference at Duke about that, about reflecting away and reflecting toward. Um,
Yeah,
and then also
connected to
interesting. Go ahead, Eve.
one of the questions that I saw in the chat, which was what are our opinions on, I think it wasn't necessarily this issue, but one thing that I'm excited about the Space Initiative is the variety of viewpoints that are given, and the fact that we're going to have these symposia and events that directly take on some of the most pressing and controversial issues. And it's less that we're aligning ourselves with like go, go, go in every potential arena, and more that we are enabling this unique interdisciplinary perspective on some really complex and nuanced issues that is going to enable not just us, but also students entering the industry to think critically and make informed decisions on a number of challenging issues.
Absolutely. I'll say to the last thing about space medicine. So yes, it's something very exciting. I mean, Duke has an amazing hospital system, and we have professors both working on how to go into space to make medicines back on Earth, but also how to help astronauts, help future people, kind of as space exploration makes a bigger thing. So we, it, Eve and I are both very Googleable. If you want to find our emails, we'd love to take any more questions. Is our favorite topic. And I also just thank Jonah for his time. I mean, it's so cool to just watch what he's doing. That's really
Right.
fantastic.
Always happy to
Okay.
chat.
Well, sure. Well, I'll jump in if you don't mind, just to offer appreciation to Dan, Jonah, and Eve, as well as the audience for a great session. Thank you, everybody. Have a great rest of the day.